Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSCI 1300. In this video, we will talk about how to implement a split function to help with parsing data from a file. So imagine that you have a file that has this kind of format. You have what looks like a name, a major, and a score separated by commas, and the entire file has this on every line. So you can expect that every time that you go through the file and you grab something like a line, say we're using getLine or something, we could grab the entire contents of one line in the file. If we wanted to then parse this information, we could use a split. And we would have to use a split every time that we grab a line from the file while we're reading through the file. So what does a split need? Well, in order to use a split, we have to have a series of variables or arrays in order to make the split work. The first thing that we will need to think about is what is the number of types of data on a line. For instance, in the example that we've given, we have 3 types of data on a line, so our size would be 3. We'll also need a string array of the same size as the number of pieces of data on the line. This will be our storage destination for what we want parsed from our line or our string that we're going to separate. We'll also have to have a string to hold that information, which we have just grabbed from the file, that we need to parse and store into the array. And lastly, we will also need to know what type of separator character is being used in the file to denote what is and what is not what we want to store. In order to call split, we will have to pass in the line, the separator character, the array, and the size of the array, which is the number of pieces of data on the line. Split usually returns an integer, which we will set with a catch by saying itnum equals the function call. What this will do is it will allow us to figure out how many things were split every time we call the function. And if we have something that goes wrong, we can also check num to see if it has a flag value to tell us what happened. Maybe we encounter an empty string, or we get something that we can't actually parse. So say we take our array and we have 3 types of data on the line. We would have a 0, a 1, and a 2 index positions, where we would store the name, the major, and the score, irregardless of whether there are spaces in the name, the major, or if the score is of some other data type. So we are storing data 1 into index 0, data 2 into index 1, and data 3 into index 2. So, for example, say we grab one line in the file, and this is what our string line would look like. What we are going to do is we're going to traverse across it character by character and look for the separator characters. We have 2 helper variables, the string for the temp and a string from the array. So we're going to pass in an array to split, and inside of split we'll have a temporary string variable that will sum up all of the characters until we hit a separator character. The moment we do see a separator character, as long as we haven't reached the end of our line, what we're going to do is then store that information into our array sequentially. So we would read the characters from I equals 0 to our delimiter, store the first word when we see a comma, reset the temp box, and then continue going. So let's jump into VS Code and talk about how to actually implement this. So I have a split function here, and I'm going to be testing it with a main. So I have a size here, which I'm going to ask in the command line to figure out how many pieces of information I need to split. I'm going to keep track of the number that I need to split, and I will also ask for a separator character along with the information that I want to split in some string called input. I've got an array here called string A, which is based on the number of pieces of data that I want to split, which I'll ask for here in a sec. And then I'm going to grab the information using getLine and then call split after I get the information that I need. So I'm passing the line, which is input, the separator character, which is sep, the array, which is a string array, and the size of that array, which is the number of the pieces of data on the line that need to be split up. NumSplit is going to give us the number of things that we split up after the function finishes. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the string array and just make sure that we grabbed everything and that we print the number of things that we grabbed after the fact. So let's talk about the split implementation. What does that look like? Well, as before, we noted that split should take in a string for the line, a character for the separator, a string array, which I'm going to call myLine, and myLine is going to be referencing the A array here. And I'm going to pass the size of that array, which of course is the number of pieces of data on the line in the file. I'm going to have to declare some helper variables, one for traversal, one for storage, and one for using a summation of the characters until I hit a delimiter character. The first thing I should do is I should check to see if there is nothing on the line. If there's nothing on the line, then we're going to stop the split and just call it again when we do have something to split up. So we're not going to store anything unless we actually have some value, unless we have value on the line. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a separator character to the end of my line of information that I just grabbed and I passed into the function. So say we have name, comma, major, comma, score. The only way we're going to denote that score should be stored is if we see a separator character following it. So we're going to add the additional separator characters so that we sum up all of the score information, see the separator character, and then we add it into our temporary array. The next thing I do is I grab the line.length here. So I'm using the .length function to figure out how many characters does this particular line have. And depending on the size of the line and the number of pieces of data, that could change. So what we want to do is basically create a variable, set it before the loop, and make sure that we grab the size so we can traverse it. What we're doing here is we're traversing across the line of information that we want to parse as long as we haven't reached the end length. So as long as we haven't reached line size, we'll just keep going. And the big thing here is that if we check a character at any index in the line and it is not the separator character, what we want to do is we want to take our temporary string and do a summation on those characters as long as we haven't seen the separator character. So we're adding up all of the characters that are not separator characters and storing them into a temporary variable. We have an else statement here, which will be for when we actually reach a separator character. And when we reach a separator character, we actually want to store the information that we have put into our temp variable. So in order to do that, what we will do is we will take our array at some index location and assign it the word or the data that we have stored into our temporary variable. After we do this, we want to increment the index of our storage array. So we have a separate variable here to keep track of when we actually store something, and only when we store something. So this variable will be different from the variable that we use up here to traverse over the information in the line. So once we've done that storage operation, we want to increase our index for our array by 1 so that we can add into a new empty location. And then we want to finally reset our temp to an empty string so that we don't keep summing up the data as we go. If we didn't do this, what would happen is that we would start clustering our data into larger and larger versions of everything on the line. So for instance, say we took data 1 and then we stored it and then we didn't reset temp. Suddenly the next thing that we stored would be data 1 and data 2 without any separation. And lastly, the last thing would be data 1, data 2, data 3 all concatenated together, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to reset the temp so that each one of the pieces of data gets stored correctly. And the very last thing that we need to do is we need to return the number of things that we have split into our storage array. So our temporary array, myLine j, is based off of the j variable. So every time that we add something to the array, we'll increment j. So we're going to return j once we have finished the process of going through every single piece of data on the line. Once we return j, we will have parsed the entire string line into the array, and we can check the contents or do something with it. So let's actually check what we did. I'm going to run the code now. And let's try this. We're going to use the same information that we tried before. And notice that we should be able to store something even if it has a space, a different type of separator character, because we're only really looking for the comma to separate the pieces of information. So here we need to enter the number of pieces of data on a line. So since we entered Meg, Computer Science 96, we're going to pass in 3 for the number of pieces of data. And lastly, we need to enter the separator character, which is what we're going to use the comma to denote the difference between one piece of data and another. So after we do this, what we do is we use the for loop and we traverse across the string array. We print the contents at the 0, the 1, and the 2 indexes, and then we print the number of things that we split, which is our j variable coming back from our function. So this is how we implement a split function from top to finish. I hope that this is helpful when thinking about how to implement this with your projects coming up, because it's really important to think about what is the number of pieces of data on the line and to tailor your split call based on that. That's all I've got for right now. Thanks for watching and happy coding.